there was some controversy about this Miles Morales What If Thor book that came out and how it was insensitive to the African American community. And I wanted to talk to you about that because I told you before we came on, I brought this question. I said, do you care to talk about this? I just want to talk about it with somebody because I live, and I was telling Jernos, I was like, I live in the whitest place in the world, right? I live in rural Eastern Kentucky. It ain't nothing but white hillbillies. That's who we are, and nothing wrong with that. That's who we are. So when I see something like that, and it had, I saw some of the pages from the books, like he was saying it's Hammer time. Well, that's corny. And it's an MC Hammer reference, but it's also a Thor reference. And then there was something else that he said, like, yo, bro, or, I guess they were stereotyping, young black men, and that's how they talk. Like, what's your thought on that? Do you think that's an overreaction?
So, yeah, first off, I read the Bleeding Cool article. It was very vague. I want to get my hands on this book because I'm really curious now. I know it was a Mexican individual that wrote the story.
Mm-hmm.
I know he was getting flack from people saying, oh, the white guy. So that shows that, first off, folks, before we have an opinion, especially if it's a sensitive opinion on a sensitive topic, make sure you know what you're talking about, because ignorance can come from any side. Like, this guy was not white who wrote this story. But so I can't really speak to the story. I can't say this is insensitive. This is not insensitive. But what I can say is I think questioning it is valid. I think looking at this and saying, is this insensitive, is valid, because, and I think this is where everyone needs to put down the politics, put down like just the sensationalized. Remember I said earlier about how everything can be is sensationalized these days, and that allows us to kind of get in these feelings, and we get reactionary, and we forget how to have a conversation, and we just get so built on these emotions based on whatever rhetoric. Let's put all that aside and just try to see each other as human beings, as different individuals that have walked in different shoes. Like you just said, you live in Kentucky. It is what it is there. I live in California. I grew up in the Bay Area, born in Oakland, grew up in Richmond. I grew up around all different races, and experienced that growing up. My wife is black. My children are mixed. So when we talk about the black experience in America, it is one that is, in many ways much different than a white person's experience. But it's not just about race either. Your experience, we just said it, your experience as a white male in Kentucky is different than a white male's experience in California or whatever. There's race, there's class, there's religion, there's different things that we go through in life. I think that there's a fine line in trying to identify with these cultural differences where you're doing it in a productive manner or where you're doing it in a counterproductive manner. And we go back to the cliche saying, the age-old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right.
So maybe this individual who is Mexican, and remember, Miles Morales is not just black, a African-American or a black man or a young black man. He is Latino as well, because he's half Puerto Rican. So maybe some of this was tone deaf. Maybe you're trying to tend to an audience. I mean, like, look at, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but I wrote an article years ago now, just randomly one night, called The Commodification of HipHop. And I talked about how they took this art, first off, if you go back in the history in the 80s, when hip hop came about, it was very culturally aware. Even NWA, as foul as some of their lyrics were and whatnot, they were express yourself. They were talking about, building up the black community, doing positive, stop the violence, all that stuff. You had politicians and a lot of people, top people in the limelight in this country scared of what is this music? You know, Dan Quayle came out and said Tupac has no place in this society. Ban their records, take them off the shelves. But then you get into the 90s, especially into the late 90s, after Tupac had passed and Biggie had passed, and it started turning into this commodity that everybody wanted. Now everybody wants rap music and hip hop to sell their product. So now you have cereal ads, you know, Honey Smacks, and we're rapping, you know, and then they're rapping in the commercial, and they're like, you know, it's everywhere. So I look at a lot of that and I'm like, you know, you got your, you know, maybe it's white kids in the video rapping and whatever. And it's not that white kids from the suburbs of California or, you know, the, like you said, the, maybe the backwoods of a middle America state. It doesn't mean that they can't like hip hop and that they can't, you know, get into that. But why are you doing it? And what is your purpose? So I think that's where it can be tone deaf. So for this specific situation, when you're actually using a Black, Latino, obviously we perceive Miles to be Black because of the color of his skin. So could it be insensitive? Maybe. I need to read the story. Could it be tone deaf? Maybe. A couple of the little, like you said, the little taglines that they're trying to use to be whatever. It's like, not only is it corny, but I don't know. But I want to encourage anyone who thinks that this was bad. I want to encourage you all to don't jump to conclusions and pick up the pitchforks. Don't just pick up the pitchforks and scream racism and scream, you know, get this guy fired. You know, this is white rape, like, because again, the guy's not white.
Right.
So, but again, you don't need to be white in order to be tone deaf to race and those cultural kind of stereotypes. So let's not react on emotion. Let's be able to have the conversation. And maybe this can be a learning experience that we all can learn from, because it's not about being sensitive. Because I will say this, kind of my final point here. We can't be so sensitive to where we're offended by everything.
Right.
Because if we are, it gives us the ability to, first off, always play victim. And that's not always good. But in a world where legislation and lawmakers and special interests, no matter what party you vote for or what you believe in, like they're trying to sell our votes or buy our votes. And when we give them too much power, and we think it's for one reason, we think that we're giving them the power of you know, what am I trying to say? Like we don't want offensive behavior to be a cultural norm. And if we start allowing legislation to come in and censoring things, that might backfire on us. Anybody read Fahrenheit 451 or
yes, sir.
1984 and all this stuff? Right. So, but what we do want to do is we want to get rid of old, outdated cultural norms where we say, oh, a woman's place is only in a kitchen. Or like something I just recently experienced. Somebody used the R word in terms of mental development to categorize people in this hobby. They left multiple comments that I had to flag and delete saying, oh, if you guys collect like this, you must be right. And I have a special needs son, and I teach special needs children. And I made a public statement saying that I will not tolerate this. But I said in that statement, if it's simply that you weren't consciously aware of the ramifications of using this word, maybe now's the time to humble yourself, gain some empathy, and learn. So I wasn't just picking up a pitchfork and trying to shove it down people's throats. I'm like, you got to understand why. So maybe that's what this situation is. Let's learn from it. Let's read the story. Don't sit and say it's one thing without reading the story. And then let's have a conversation and let's listen from both sides. And if there are people that are offended by this or that think it's sensitive, especially if they are African American, Black, Latino, at least listen to them and hear them out.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And that, everything today is so politicized, and a lot of that has to do with social media. That's where I saw the article. That's where I saw that. And then I looked at it and I was like, well, okay. I mean, it sounds really corny, but I have the book. I haven't read it yet. And we just so happened to be talking today, and I was like, I'm going to ask him about this, because I am, I do live in rural America. You're on the West Coast, and I just kind of wondered, how our views on, because I agree with everything you said, and I just wondered how our views, if at all, would differ on that. Like I said, I don't know if it's an overreaction or not. Most of that stuff it's usually somewhere in the middle. Right. But I agree with what you said. If somebody's offended, maybe it's time for this guy. He can step back and take a look and better himself moving forward. So, all right.